Hello, and welcome to Temporal Horizons Summer Podcast. Please enjoy the show. Welcome to Temporal Horizons Productions Summer Podcast, a talk show where we dive into the captivating world of theatre and multimedia productions. Whether you're an avid theatre enthusiast or someone looking to explore the cutting-edge world of art, technology, and creative productions, this podcast episode is your backstage pass to learn more about this industry and the people behind it. I am your host, Harry Fitzpatrick, and today we have an exciting episode lined up as we shine a spotlight on a talented neurodivergent actor and director who is most known for directing stage productions at The Space, Jack Studio Theatre, and Rebel Theatre, to name a few. She has most recently performed in her own cabaret show, Cabaret ADHD, which was a piece about her own diagnostic journey, and has performed in several productions from musicals to Shakespeare, all the while campaigning within the Equity Union on behalf of neurodivergent creatives and performers. We would like to welcome Rachael Bellis. Rachael, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
Nice to see you. And first off, I'd like to ask, how are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. A little bit tired this morning, but I suppose that's what I get for busy life.
Yeah, I know you mean. This is literally today's the first day I've just managed to sit down.
Yeah.
Mm. So, do you like to tell listeners a bit about who you are and your, as I say in the comic book industry, your origin story?
Yeah, sure. So I trained in drama at NYU Tisch. Um, I don't know if that's really my origin in terms of working in theatre. Um, as a child, I found it really difficult to make friends, as I think many neurodivergent creatives can relate to. Um, and so my family put me into acting classes to like help me with that, I guess. Um, so that's probably my origin. I was 12 in local acting classes in Pennsylvania where I was living. Um, and yeah, it really sparked something. So I went to drama school, and now I'm working in theatre, I guess.
And what made you decide to go from studying drama and becoming influenced in the state to wanting to move to the UK and develop your craft over here?
A couple of things really. So when I was in drama school, my teacher gave me a book by Sir Peter Hall about Shakespeare, um, and that sparked kind of a love for Shakespeare in me. Um, and I wanted to visit the UK. So I came here for 3 months, and went to a lot of theatre. I went to the Globe, um, and also just contemporary theatre. Um, I went to the National. I saw some mixed media, which is kind of a love of mine now. Um, and then I decided to apply for a class uh, with Peter Hall. So he ran a masterclass through Kingston University at the time. Um, and I was accepted onto that program, so I had to be here full time. So I joined that, and then I sort of stayed afterwards.
Going a couple of questions back. Um, so, what was it like studying the theatre, and what was the creative arts scene in America like when you was growing up?
Um, so when I was a child, the acting classes were local, but they were really far away from my house. So we had to drive half an hour just to take anything. really. But there was also community theatre, which I think in this country you would call Amdram theatre. And that was mainly like teachers and other kids. And that was really exciting and fun, but it was all musical theatre. There wasn't anything, it was just musicals. Um, so I was trained originally in musical theatre. And then when I went to NYU Tisch, I kept up with the musical theatre training, but there were so many more exciting things on offer. So I learned viewpoints technique and the method, and um, I took classical theatre, Shakespeare classes, as you might have gathered, um, and that's, I don't know, just the sort of breadth of how much there was really exciting. I was living in New York, so that's kind of a hub of theatre in the States. Um, and so I was going to Broadway shows whenever I could afford them. They usually do something called Student Rush. And when I was there, Student Rush was actually quite cheap. I think it's more expensive now.
Mm.
Um, but you could get tickets for like $10, $25 maximum, um, and pretty good seats. So that's, I guess, what I was doing and learning from. And some of my teachers were really exciting practitioners of theatre. So I learned viewpoints from Mary Overley, who's one of the original founders of the technique. Um, and that was really exciting as well. Um, so yeah, just I think
Mm.
learning new things was for me one of the most exciting parts of that, and just exploring. Theatre might be a, as you might understand, a special interest of mine, and so just learning literally everything I could about the history of theatre, the contemporary theatre, um, seeing other plays. I mean, I was really immersed in it, and it was really great.
Nice. And I was going to say, I can relate to, as you were saying then, about having to travel to get to drama classes. As when I was growing up in Spain, I lived about half an hour to an hour's drive outside of Valencia City. So I'd have to get the bus and then I'd have to get like the train, the metro to the classes. So it was like, mm. But at the same time, it's like being a neurodivergent creative is like you're just trying to put yourself into a space where you're using that time to warm yourself up, like
Mm.
getting ready to be in that zone.
I was really lucky that, well, maybe luck is, maybe it was a cultural thing actually, but in America there's not great public transportation, so I was really lucky that my dad drove me,
Mm,
so I could sit in the car and put some music on. For me, music can be a stim, so
mm,
I was able to just put some music on and listen to that and get into the headspace or the zone. Um,
mm,
and just prepare myself to be in that environment. But um I didn't know I was neurodivergent until a couple years ago. So some of the coping mechanisms that I had in place did work, but weren't done with the knowledge of what was going on. So I didn't know singing was a stim, for example. I just did it to feel better.
yeah. And would you mind telling the listeners about obviously building on the subject as well, the challenges of being a neurodivergent creative and performer, and how you feel that you faced many challenges which you've mentioned upon, as well as helped you being able to perform, as well as when you're directing, seeing the world in your own unique way.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I would say that the act of like making theater in itself doesn't present me challenges. It's the act of it's interacting in a world that doesn't cater to me, if that makes sense. And I'm doing a lot of like activism work, I think, in terms of trying to make a difference and change that for other neurodivergent creatives, because I think there's just certain areas of the industry which, for better or for worse, are not catering, or maybe for worse, are not catering to our brains. So things like networking. I can be really great at networking. People have said that to me before. I don't really see it, but people have said, "Oh, you're really good at it," but it's really hard work for me. Um,
Mm.
I have to sort of be in a room with people I don't know. I have to deal with an anxiety attack beforehand, um, and then over analyzing everything I've said afterwards for weeks. Um, and I understand that that's a way that people get jobs in this business, and so I work really hard at it. But that sort of environment, and it is changing, it is getting better. People are catering more for a neurodivergent brain, so rest spaces and that sort of thing at these kind of events. Um, but that's a big one for me, was just jumping into like a New York scene and then a London scene, and just networking at events. Um, so that's an example. Um, Other, I suppose, kinds of challenges, in rehearsal rooms. You know, one of the things I have is ADHD, and ADHD can be difficult in terms of managing emotions. And when you're managing, either as an actor managing a character's emotions, or as a director managing all the actors' emotions, that can get really um, difficult if you're then struggling to manage your own, or even identify your own emotions. Sometimes I struggle with that. Um, and so it's really just about saying to everyone, listen, day one, these are my access needs, and here is um, something I struggle with emotions. And if I get into a situation where I'm stressed or difficult, please can you give me what, XYZ that I need. So for me, it might be space, or a quiet area to rest in, or that sort of thing. Um, and but I'm still learning how to build that into my own practice, and I've been doing this for a really long time, so I wasn't always successful uh, at doing that, like at figuring out what those things are. I think, yeah, I think there is, like I said, it is changing. There's more understanding now than there was when I started, um, but it has definitely held people back, like held me back, held other creatives back that I've known. Um, and I think I'm looking forward to the change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like, especially with networking events, because it's like you're trying to sell yourself and what you do to others so that they are interested, and also as well maybe form good connections and friendships. And it's just like, well, it's kind of like you're trying to cross a minefield whilst hopping and blindfolded.
Yeah,
Like you just because you sometimes it's a challenge to when you have that when someone's trying to make a joke, but you're trying to do something you don't know if you've gone too far, or even when you are younger and you don't really, as you say, understand your emotions true, and it can sometimes lead to like a difficulty, like an imposter type syndrome of thinking, do I belong here? Do I deserve to be here? But I think, yeah, it has come a long way in terms of both the understanding and support, and even having as like I even for me, I had great support from my tutors, like um, name drop here, Vanessa Dunley and Alessandro Schusco, and others like sure you know Wendy Morgan, who also worked with Peter Hall at the National. And I think that's the thing. You just being very upfront from the beginning and making sure you surround people who understand the challenges you need and help you in order to obviously be the best version of yourself towards achieving what works for a production, as well as helping you grow in both confidence and in managing like networking events or leading productions or performing as well.
Yeah, I try and think of networking events as like almost like a performance in themselves. And maybe that's why some people have said just people have said, "Oh, you're really good at networking," and I've gone, I'm really terrible at this. Um, why do you think I'm good at it? But I think they're seeing the performance, so they're seeing. I mean, it's masking. It's 100% masking, but they're
Mm,
seeing the mask, and it's succeeding for some reason. And while that can be really great for a career move, um, I need a lot of rest afterwards. It takes a
mm,
lot out of me. So, but that's not something that I had the words to describe, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I have the words now to describe what's going on, so I know, okay, this is what's happening for me, and this is what fixes that problem. Um, and so yeah, just I guess if we're thinking about advice for anybody listening, um, I would say get to know yourself and get to know what you need, and then don't be afraid to ask for it up
mm,
front. Um, but yeah, networking is one of the worst aspects of this industry. I don't know anybody who likes it. I,
mm,
neurotypical or neurodivergent, I don't know anybody who actively loves networking. Um,
mm,
but it is a necessary part of the job if you want to keep getting jobs. Um, so unfortunately, we all have to just sort
mm,
of buckle in and do it. Um, Sorry, you mentioned, I've kind of gone on a tangent, but you mentioned another thing, which was imposter syndrome, and I wanted to address that too because
mm,
I definitely feel that all the time.
mm,
Um, some days I think, oh, I'm nobody in this industry, so it wouldn't matter if I'm not in the industry anymore. I'll just leave. Um, and the thing that keeps me grounded is that I deserve to be just as much as anybody else in this industry. And I have something to say, and I have a voice um, to use. And maybe that's partly my training because at NYU Tisch they teach you to kind of make your own work. They really build theatre makers there as opposed to just performers. Um,
mm,
and so I think that drive is really strong within me. Um, so there's something that keeps me going despite the imposter syndrome. Um, so I would say if anybody's struggling with that, um, it doesn't really matter if you're making theatre for public consumption or you're just writing something or you're doing something at home. Um, just start, just start doing it, and in a perfect world, we'd all have the opportunities to showcase everything we're doing, but um, you're still a creative, even if you're just writing in a journal at home.
mm,
And sometimes we need that separate time. Sometimes we need that sort of art that's just personal to us that we're not going to
mm,
share. And I think those moments help fuel me and help me conceive bigger ideas so
mm,
that then I can become more creative in my practice. So yeah, I would definitely say just get back to being creative for the sake of being creative and see what happens because again, this is maybe my training, but like it was very much process focused and journey focused instead of results focused.
mm,
So if you're thinking about what you're making and you're thinking about like what's exciting about that, something will come. But if you're thinking about, okay, how is this going to look or how will this be received, you're almost starting on the wrong foot. And that's not to say I'm a director in practice, so obviously thinking about how it will be received is part of my job and is really important and really crucial. Um, but that's not necessarily the same thing as thinking about a result, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, just that's my advice, I guess, is just to step away from results thinking and just think about the process. And I know that sounds really like um,
mm,
superficial or whatever, but it is definitely true. And it's just some. I mean, I have to remind myself about that constantly because, like you say, I get the imposter syndrome daily. Um, but just stepping away from the networking side and the professional side and you know the sort of side of the art that's kind of outside of us, if that makes sense, and just really focusing on, okay, what am I making and what
mm.
do I like about it, and that sort of thing, I think is really helpful. um
Yeah, because that's the thing about with some parts of the education system now, especially with the current government sort of goal is about getting results rather than, as you were saying about what the process and developing it, right? You have to have a answer and explanation for something that sometimes it can't be like described, like when you're doing the performance and then you have to break down and analyze it and try and explain it. And it's like, I just can't really explain this, just how I feel it works for that moment.
mm,
Because that's that's the thing as well. It's like just it's a very abstract thought process, and sometimes it's something that you can't really define really. And I was actually wondering about, like, what would you say is the differences? And sorry, it sounds a bit of a tangent question, but with being neurodivergent, you have many questions, but like a tree, you spring out, which is which is one of the reasons for the Temporal Horizons Productions logo,
oh, cool.
as well as just like the idea of storytelling not just being bound by one linear form, but can spread out into many different routes and possibilities.
Cool.
So, and yeah, my question I wanted to ask as well is, like, how would you compare the theatre, like the creative independent scene in New York to London, and the general attitude toward the arts on both sides of the Atlantic?
um I think it's really hard for me to define that, actually, because when I was in New York I was like 17 to 21.
Mm,
um and so I think it's kind of linked into my own sort of free spiritedness at the time. And I've lived in London for a much longer time now. um, and so I'm not sure that I'm really linked into what the creative scene is like in New York, but I think there's two sort of aspects. There's how I felt in drama school, which was very free, very open, like there was tons to explore. And I think what the industry is more sort of brutally like, which is very much a business. I mean, it's similarly a business in London, but I think it's a little bit less um, like I don't know how to describe it. Business like, I guess. It's still a business here, but it's slightly less rigid and formal. And I think in New York, there's very specific ways, I suppose, to try and continue to get work. Um, that's not to say networking and knowing people doesn't help, because it definitely does, probably more so. Um, but I think it can be almost draining in terms of how much you have to continue to grind in the city. Whereas in London, I feel like and maybe this is just my personal experience, but I feel like there's a little more opportunity to kind of build yourself, um, and make your own stuff. And again, not to say that's not possible in New York, I'm sure it is. Um, and it may be, like I said, it's kind of hard to separate from my personal circumstances at each time in my life, because I think, being a student, being kind of unsure of like how the world works in general, I guess, um, probably contributed to my experience there. But um, both cities are very vibrant in terms of like the amount of art that's available, um, to sort of watch as an audience member. And also, I think if you're creating art, you should be trying to watch as much as you can. I mean, I know that there's limiting factors budget wise. And again, that's harder in New York, I think, than it is in London. I think New York is more expensive. Um, the West End is getting almost as bad as Broadway, but it's not quite there. So at least it's cheaper. I mean, I remember when Hamilton. I know Hamilton is Hamilton, and it's like huge ticket sales or whatever. But I remember when Hamilton came out, my family in the States were saying I can't get a ticket because they're $900, and I can't afford $900 for like the cheaper seats. Not even. I mean, it was just that was the only seats left, and I went. It would be cheaper for you to fly here. Not that I'm an advocate of just flying places because carbon footprint, but it'd be cheaper for them to fly to London and get like a £35 ticket, which is what I paid to see Hamilton.
Yeah.
And again, those tickets sold out pretty quickly too, but um, just as opposed to $900, that was at the the height of Hamilton.
Mm.
Um, that was insane to me. So um, yeah, I think it's just accessibility wise, London is a little bit easier to sort of break into. And I think when you are disabled, or neurodivergent, that is definitely a factor. I mean, the disability pay gap means that we, on average, are paid 17% less than our colleagues. That's across any industry. I'm sure there's some specific numbers just for the arts, but um, we have less money to go around, than our neurotypical colleagues. Um, and so access of like to the arts is really important. And I've just found that there are plenty of schemes in this country, and I can't speak for New York because I don't know, but there's plenty of schemes in this country that like reduce prices or allow changes. I remember going to see Beauty and the Beast, and I saw it in the 90s in New York. It's my favorite musical. Um, and it was touring around the country, and it was on in London, and I was really excited. So I was like, let me go. I put it in my diary. I booked tickets. This was last summer, and I missed the show. I was at home. I was like, I got nothing on today. It was in three different calendars and diaries. Like I had written everywhere, do not forget to see Beauty and the Beast. You love this show. And I missed it. And I was like completely distraught. Like I was really upset. And I called the theater or emailed them the next day because I don't really call people if I can help it. But I emailed the theater, and they, at first, they were a bit like, you just missed it. And I said, look, I assure you, I wrote it down in three different places. It's my favorite show. I really want to see it. I have this disorder. Um, this is why I forgot to go. My ADHD. And they basically I still had to pay, like, because they were better seats, so I still had to pay a little bit more money. Um, but they basically uh, booked me in to see the show the next month.
Mm.
So sometimes you can kind of sort of go, okay, I have this problem, I have these access needs, and in this country, theatres are usually pretty good about um,
There's a level of flexibility.
yeah, and I'm not saying that that's perfect at all. There's a long way that this industry has to go to be able to deal with access requirements. I mean, for example, not everybody's access needs are the same, and many
Mm.
theaters, especially on the West End, have one accessible performance, um, which isn't really great. I mean, because some people need complete quiet, and other people need lots of sound, and
Mm.
um,
Some people
there's
need like captions as well.
yeah, yeah, exactly. There's often more captioned performances than one, but often they lump all of those things together, and actually we all have
Mm.
conflicting access needs, so it's probably better to to have more access performances and say this is going to be the performance with the lights on in the theater, and we'll take the flashing images out and that sort of thing. This is going to be the performance where we allow sound. This is going to be like a quiet only performance, no one should be speaking, which to be fair is a lot of them anyway. uh,
Mm.
but there should be different levels, I think.
Yeah, and I think as well, just for audiences to properly just sit down and do the research for when different types of performances on. So that if you have a family member that does need access requirements to be able to go to that, because sometimes I've been to or worked on shows where issues have occurred and they can only say, I'm very sorry, we can offer you this, but we can't unfortunately change too much with the production.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's getting a balance really, and we're getting better at it as a society. Um, because as I said, some access needs are conflicting, and you're right. If a show is only on for a few nights, as opposed to months and months, then it's not possible to sort of do a performance that actually would meet everybody's needs. Um, but it's just about, I suppose, being open up front,
Mm.
and sort of saying, okay, we have this accessible performance and it will meet these access needs. And maybe next time we do the run, we'll do this other version. Um, I think it can be really tricky, especially for smaller theaters and smaller.
Like regional.
Yeah, yeah. Because you're right, there are limitations, especially if it's a length of time issue. Because I think the more time the run is, the more you can build different performances in. But I think in general, it's just important to communicate that, and yeah, I guess I would say like access. For me, I always say to people, my access needs are a living document, so they change. I don't um I don't always know what my access needs are in advance, and I'm trying to be better
Mm.
about figuring that out. But sometimes I'll be in a situation where I've never experienced this before and I don't know how I'm going to react. And it is my responsibility to understand and learn my own triggers. So
Yeah.
it's my responsibility to figure out what's caused that issue, um, and then to communicate that with the people who I'm working for. Um,
Mm.
but then it is their responsibility to meet those needs when I
And
communicate
when
them.
they can as well. And that's the thing, like sometimes you could have something that could happen during the day that that could trigger like something that's out of your control.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, like I try and stave off things like a meltdown or a shutdown as much as possible, but those do happen. I have experienced them in rehearsal rooms. For me, a lot of times my triggers are emotional ones because I'm not understanding someone's emotions.
Mm,
Um, but anything can I mean, somebody could be really sensitive to light and sound, and then something happens that nobody expected.
mm,
So for example, actually, I was in a production once where um, the it was during a run of a show, and the fire alarm. It was a pub theater when it was above a pub, and the fire alarm went off unexpectedly. So it wasn't a drill or
mm,
anything. And I had a performer who was highly reactive to that sound, and so she shut down. So we had to stop the show so that she could calm down, so that we could. I mean, we also had the issue of there was a fire alarm, and I was thinking we had to evacuate the
mm,
theater, so we had to like go down and make sure it wasn't an actual fire and get ready to evacuate and try and start going to our fire meeting point and that sort of thing. But luckily, it was a false alarm, or well, I think like there was a lot of smoke in the kitchen, but no actual fire. Um, so luckily, it wasn't a serious emergency. But we still had to stop the show long enough to calm the other actor down because she had a sound reactivity to that unexpected sound, which was happening while she was on stage. So she ran off the stage and started hyperventilating backstage, and
mm,
we had to um, help her basically.
mm,
Um, and so that's a situation where no one was able to predict that that was going to happen. Um, but we knew that that was a risk for her because we knew that that was one of her
mm.
needs, because she knew that that was one of her needs.
Yeah, and it happened unexpectedly, and when she was in a situation where you are on stage and you have to be vulnerable, and that does take a lot out of you, even if you are neurotypical. Because yeah, I've had situations when I was studying in Spain where they weren't very understanding, and
Mm,
looking back on it, there was some cases where with some other actors where it leveled on bullying. Because one time I was deliberately, and this is a thing, like pinned down to the floor,
mm, mm.
which you put in that situation and you can't then properly rehearse, and you have the and then you can't obviously do it to the best of your ability. And I think as and the person that was in charge of it, like they didn't like protect or support or understand. And I think as a director and as a producer and as a co-actor, you need to be responsible, as you were saying, as you did. You were responsible for protecting, not protecting, but making sure they're okay, making sure that their accesses are met, and obviously not being afraid to, if something goes wrong, just take the time, ask the audiences to be patient, and sort this situation out. Because if audiences, we might not feel it at the moment, but they are, if they can see there's a problem, they'll be patient, understand, and they'll sort it out.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that audience with the fire alarm, obviously they knew there was a huge problem because they heard the fire alarm also. Um, but they were completely understanding, and it was just about communicating with them as well. So, I mean, it was lucky that I was there because I was the director for that show. I was just there watching that night, and I just happened to be there. So I kind of took charge. I think the stage management would normally have done this, but because I was there, I just sort of took charge. And I sort of said to the audience, look, obviously you can hear the fire drill. I'm going to go and check that everything's okay. And then when we came back, obviously the other performer needed to be calmed down. So I was just saying, okay, we're just waiting for our performers to reset, and we'll just reset as soon as they're ready. um, and um, you know, give us a little bit of time to reset, and then we'll take it from this line, and we'll just do it from this moment of the show. And they were able, and this was a children's show, so I think there were some children in the audience as well, and they were able to suspend their disbelief, um, and just kind of get back into the story. But they had a little bit of time to process as well. So the audience not only did the actor need to process, but I would imagine some people in the audience needed to kind of process what had just happened with the fire alarm. So it's actually a really good thing to be that flexible as an audience, and I think that they generally are, because they need the same things we do, because we're all people. So um yeah, just it's just communicating, I think, communicating with them,
Mm.
and just sort of expressing like a human side. um
It's how they relate to.
yeah, exactly, and I think it goes a really long way. But yeah, I mean, we had a reviewer in, and they mentioned it in their review of the show, and they said, there was a fire alarm that interrupted the show, and luckily it was just a false alarm, but um that the cast handled it really beautifully, just getting back into the swing of things. And I think, that's a credit to everyone. The person who was affected by that sound, it was a credit to her that she was then able to kind of get back into, because you know I experienced sound sensitivity, not quite to the same sounds, but it can be really hard. It can be really hard to get back into a headspace where you can perform. um and she did it, and that's commendable. um so yeah, just, I guess I've kind of lost my train of thought really, but like, I think humanizing everybody is, I think that's where I was going.
Yeah, and no, I felt it was very, very nicely detailed. And I think for listeners as well, it's like wanting to understand. And I think the more we understand, the more we're able to relate to, and it helps towards everybody, the world being a better place. Because often now it's like there's so much sort of people having their hands up to their ears, or us versus them attitude, and rather than just sort of sitting down and debating and explaining and just a dialogue. And I know sometimes it's easier said than done, and you do have groups who know they're practicing or preaching messages which are inherently wrong or harmful, but at the same time, it's talking to them and asking them why do they think this, and what can we do to try and find an understanding. But and this is the thing with like as you was saying earlier, just seeing as many shows as you can as an artist. And I saw one recently which was using the discussions around the current like immigration policy of deportation, and like the way they did it, rather than just something which was very hard, straight, or just beating you on the head with it, rather used like humor and comedy and showing a relationship forming, but then having it sort of drip feed in and there. So it's like an underlying current. And then at the end, it's like it hits you. And rather than it just all happening at the end, it's there at the beginning all the way through. So it's like a Greek tragedy. You know something's coming. You don't know when though, and you don't know what it's going to be. And but by making humor in that, it helps audiences. You might have different opinions. Like you could have a show where you've got somebody that voted Remain, who voted for Brexit, finding a way to sort of laugh and connect, and then they come out afterwards in a bar or cafe just chatting and
Mm.
thinking about the message and hearing different points of view. So, or
Yeah,
someone who might be, sorry, I was going to say, someone who's neurotypical and someone who's neurodivergent, hearing their different perspectives.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool. Sorry, I was just agreeing with you. I didn't mean to interrupt. Um, yeah, I think, I mean, for me, that's the main reason why I make art. Why I sort of got into directing, because I felt like I had something to say about the world.
Mm,
Um, and I love political theater. Political theater is kind of my
mm,
favorite sort, I guess. Although I do, I mean, I will qualify that by saying I think all theater is political, um,
mm,
but just that sort of like bringing that kind of understanding through art, I think is really strong. Um, and relating it to other things. So, I mean, you talked about Brexit and Remain. I did the first piece I ever directed was um, Brecht's Fear and Misery of the Third Reich, which was originally a play Brecht wrote in the 30s, the 1930s.
yeah.
Um, say that now. We're almost in the 2030s. Um, that Brecht wrote in the 30s about the rise of Nazi Germany, and he was writing the play at the time that that was rising, like at the time that that sort of sentiment was happening.
Mm,
And some of the messaging and that sort of thing is similar to what's being messaged or the way things are being messaged now. And it's not the same message, but it's close and it's
mm,
scary. And so in 2017, I directed my version of that play, which I set in sort of the future, the future. If if things had continued the way, I think they're changing a bit. I think there's maybe a little more hope now, but at the time I was very hopeless because Trump had just been elected in my home country in America, and Brexit had just been voted in, and we were getting Johnson, and I was just like, oh my god, these people are horrible. So I decided I wanted to make a piece of art about it, and yes, I'm very anti-Tory and anti-Republican, and I'm sorry to anyone who isn't, who is listening. Shame on you. Sorry, but um, I'm not going to hide my own opinions or beliefs.
mm,
And maybe arguably the problem with that play was that I was threading my own beliefs into it a bit too much. And I think sometimes the nature of theatre is really great if you leave it up to the audience to decide. Um,
yeah.
but I felt like I was seeing something at the time that I wanted to comment on, so I commented on it. And um I think that's the strength of theatre actually is someone can make a piece of art about that, or conversely, and again I think everything's political.
Well, that's the thing as well. Like, if you think back to, say, the play, like one of the very early Western ideas of a play, The Persians, which was not a few years just after the very famous battle between the Persian Empire and the Greeks, and it was written from Athens, hot when they're hot on the heels of their victory. They're sort of a what America kind of is like an empire in all but name, and then you just have the Persians, like the ghost of the current King Xerxes, his father's ghost, telling his court, "Beware becoming too hubristic. Watch out, you're gonna set yourself up for failure." And it was written to warn like the Greeks about be careful, you could repeat history. One empire can be toppled easily. Yours can just as easily be. I might be messing up the message, and it's been a while since I've read that play. But even then, you'd think then back to some of the Shakespeare's Macbeth, which was premiered not long after the Gunpowder Plot, which and this Macbeth tells a story about To Kill a King, and with the Gunpowder Plot by Guy Fawkes, it was sort of like audiences getting an understanding of what's inside somebody's head and why they've got assassinate a figure in power.
Yeah, I mean, I I love that. I mean, I do think all theatre is inherently political, especially if you look at history and when things are written. Um, but I think it's so interesting because something like Shakespeare can be so subversive too, because he also was writing Macbeth, like during the court of James the First slash
Mm.
sixth, and knowing it was going to be performed for the king, um, and commissioned effectively by the palace.
He was a Kingsman.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So he was writing it for the king, and he put things in there like the sort of procession of ghosts, and the end of the procession of ghosts, the stage direction is to have one of the ghosts is carrying a mirror, and Shakespeare barely ever has any stage directions, but I'm pretty sure that's in the folio. But don't quote me on that because I'd have to.
There's also the exit pursued by bear stage direction in another
Yeah, yeah,
play.
in another play. But I think don't quote me on whether the mirror is in the folio because I'm not 100% sure. I haven't read the folio in a long time. But um, the procession ends with a mirror, and in theory, that's to hold up to the king. So he is supposedly a descendant of Banquo. Um, and the thing about that is that's really flattering for the king. So that's purposely put in there to, um, you know, pay flattery to this king. Um, but the king was James the First published Demonology, which was a treatise on how to kill witches.
Mm.
And then if you look at the story of Macbeth, Banquo uh, is only his descendants are only king because of this prophecy from the witches. And I think
Mm.
that's really interesting and subversive because Shakespeare's basically being like, you know, you hate witches. Well, you're only king because of a bunch of witches. But that's so buried underneath this very flattering gilded mirror of like
Yeah.
you're the descendant that actually James the First probably wouldn't have paid attention to the message that could have gotten Shakespeare beheaded. Instead,
Yeah.
you know,
And also as well as the fact that one character quotes a line that we will stick, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but sticking his head on a pole where we stick all our traitors. And when the audiences would have left the globe, they would have had to go under the bridge where you had the heads of the traitors of the state there. So it was kind of, it's there. It's like the subtle sort of political messages and how he had to navigate through that all the while making sure he didn't end up like someone like Ben Johnson in the Nick.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's kind of what I mean by theatre is always political because people are always writing or making work based on the time they live in, um, and then even if you're making a revival, which is even if you're doing Shakespeare today, often you're putting your spin on it based on what's going on around you. Um, but yeah, I think just to bring it back to what we were saying before about how can we kind of bring our perspectives together. I think that's really exciting to sort of do in terms of the sort of theatre we're making. So more theatre about a neurodivergent experience that maybe a neurotypical person can relate to. So for example, it's not theatre, it's a TV show, but it's called A Kind of Spark. It's based on a book.
I have heard of that.
It's very good, and it's about autistic women, and I think because there's currently a rise in diagnoses among
Mm,
women, um, and that's because we've gone like undiagnosed for so long, um,
mm,
that actually we've been there the whole time, and that's something that story tackles, and I think that's really exciting, and also it tackles neurodivergence in general because I mean I was reading just today actually that the first person who was diagnosed as autistic Actually, I think he passed away today. So rest in peace. But he, or maybe just this year, I'm not sure if it was today, but he was diagnosed, he was born in 1933 and he was diagnosed when he was 5. So the first diagnosis for anyone was then 1938, um, which is, not actually, it's less than 100 years ago. But as the book, A Kind of Spark, and the TV show point out, we've been around forever. We've,
Mm,
we've existed. We just, no one had a name for us, but we existed.
mm,
So I think that's really helpful, not only for autistic women, but for anybody,
mm,
because um, you know, any autistic person can look at that and point to it and go, "Look, we have existed since forever." Um,
mm.
so yeah, that's really exciting. Um,
And yeah,
sorry.
so I was going to say, it's like, and even there are figures of history that do show signs and patterns, even those who are diagnosed or not diagnosed, such as Anthony Hopkins, who has come out and been on the autistic spectrum, and he's a two-time Academy Award winner. You have Paddy Considine, the actor who's been in Game of Thrones spin-off House of the Dragon, and given a very, very strong performance of a decaying king, both physically and mentally. And you have, and even looking back at figures in time, such as Isaac Newton, or even others who show a lot of science through the way they're written about, their special interests, or how they can see the world and just being in that different perspective. And as you're saying, we've been around since the first like apes suddenly realized, yeah, if you put these two sticks together, we don't have to rely on a lightning bolt anymore for fire.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny. I was going to say Isaac Newton too when you that's the person that went through my head, and then you said it, and I thought that's really interesting that's the person we said first. Um, but that's a side note. But no, I think that it tends to be people who have come up with a new way of thinking or invented something that no one would have thought about, or that sort of thing.
Mm.
Um, and I'm not trying to say that autistic people are always the innovators. I think that's maybe neurotypical people can innovate too, I think. but
Mm.
um, but I just think it's really interesting that actually people who think divergently, and we know we've been around forever, that we can point to people and go, we probably they were autistic. You can't obviously diagnose anybody posthumously, but
There
probably,
are clues there if you.
yeah, exactly. There are clues into their life, and because we didn't have a word for it at the time, no one would have said anything.
Mm.
But I think it's really interesting. Somebody, I was talking to uh, an autistic author recently, and she said um, that a lot of like innovative thinkers or people who changed the world or invented new things were autistic, and that's just sort of one of those like commonly known things that's like maybe within the autistic community commonly known.
Mm.
um, but I think that's really interesting and exciting, and that's the sort of people we're in the company of, um, just by virtue of the fact that our brains work similarly to them and differently to everyone else.
Mm.
And it's not saying we all have to be inventors or change the face of science or whatever, um, but how exciting that some of us that we are. I mean,
Mm.
so it's okay if we're not, and I think that we have to make sure that we are saying that as well. It's okay if we're not. It's okay. It's okay if all you can do is, get up like me some days. Get
Yeah.
up. You can't even take a shower. It's too overwhelming for your senses. So you can get out of bed and maybe brush your teeth, and that's all you can do in one day. That's
Mm.
fine.
And drink a
Um,
coffee and make some toast. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, making toast is really hard actually. Like it takes a lot of energy, so don't knock it. I think
Mm.
like that is okay if that's all you can do.
Mm.
Um, if you'll never be Isaac. I mean, firstly, no one will ever be Isaac Newton because Isaac Newton is the only person who was ever going to be Isaac Newton.
Mm.
But
And
yeah,
also like you're your own person. Like no one's gonna be you, Rachel. No one's gonna be Anthony Hopkins. Nobody's gonna be Paddy Considine. Nobody's gonna be Greta Thunberg.
yeah,
No, but the same. But this is the thing. Sometimes it's like humanity. We're so random. We might have like threads or very similar sort of like neurodiverse and neurotypical conditions, but at the end of the day, I think that's the thing we just need to remind ourselves. You are your own person, and don't be ashamed for not being. If you don't feel like you aren't something, just be proud of who you are and even how far you've managed to come.
yeah. And I think we have to remember that like it's funny, I feel like we put this pressure on ourselves. Maybe it's not just us putting it on ourselves, maybe society is also putting it on us. But I think we put this pressure on ourselves. Like I have this pressure on myself to like make something like important or change the world or do something. Um, I'm not really sure where that's come from, but um, I have to kind of remember that the vast majority of people are not Isaac Newton. Or if we're looking at neurotypical people, I'm trying to think of like a really famous person that's probably neurotypical. Um, I don't know. Maybe we'll just go with like because we were talking about Shakespeare before. Maybe we'll just go with
Yeah.
King James the First. So the vast majority of people are not King James the First. King James the First was the only King James the First, and obviously he wasn't really the best guy, but but you know most people are not living that way. Most people are not our current king or or Prince Harry or anybody else. Most people are just a regular person
Mm.
making ends meet, living in a cost of living crisis, trying to
Mm.
get by, having some kids, maybe not having kids, um, you know, maybe just like working 9 to 5 in an office forever and hoping that they have something better to show for themselves. Most people. Most people are just getting by,
Mm.
and um, it's extraordinary the amount of pressure we put on ourselves because we are neurodivergent or because we are um, whatever else we are to sort of represent ourselves so strongly and be like, look, we can do these things. And I know that part of that is because society says that neurodivergent people can't, that autistic people can't, that ADHD people can't do these things. And so some of us who can do those things feel the need to kind of prove, yes, we can do them.
Mm.
It's extraordinary the amount of pressure we put on ourselves.
Yeah, and I think as well it's just the thing we just need to be kinder to ourselves and just accept that what we can do is what we can. At the end of the day, as you were saying, we're just getting by through a cost of living. We're just doing our daily lives, but at the same time, we give even the most mundane things help to inspire some of the best things in life, whether it be through art or innovation. And anyway, we're just coming to the end now of recording. Is there advice that you would give to your 17-year-old self who was studying, or to any young neurodivergent creatives out there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's hard. I thought about this question before and I didn't really come up with anything because I'm not sure I would have taken it. I'm not sure I would have taken the advice I would give myself, but because I probably had to make my own mistakes. But I guess I would just say, um, this is sort of what my dad said to me actually when I was a kid, which was just forget about all the noise, forget about the other people saying whatever they're going to say because they're going to say whatever they're going to say, regardless of who you are. Just be who you are and accept who you are, and I think learn about who you are, and I think that's the most important thing. But as I said, I don't think I would have taken that advice when I was 17. I think I was too focused on all the noise. And I still have days where I'm like that today, so I don't know. Yeah, that's the advice I would give, but would I take it? I don't know. It's a bit of a cop out maybe, but
Mm. But you would it plant the seeds there to develop? Yeah.
yeah, hopefully someday anybody listening will go, oh yeah, that was right. I should have listened to myself more. But yeah,
Mm.
listen to yourself, I think is my advice. It doesn't matter if you're thinking very differently from everyone else. That's a good thing. Um, yeah, it's a good thing.
We thank listeners for tuning in and enjoying this episode, talking to actor and creative practitioner Rachael Bellis about neurodiversity within the performing arts sector, creating work, looking after and actors, as well as the effectiveness of political theatre. Rachael, thank you for coming on, and we thank you, our listeners, for tuning in and hope you enjoy a pleasant summer. Take care.